Good day. Today I'm going to be discussing Spring Tutorial 4, working with Docker Compose to run our Spring Boot and Postgres application. Cool, let's jump into it. So Docker is basically a tool that packages our application and everything it needs, like code, libraries, and settings into a container, so it runs the same way we would run our application on a computer, right? So it's like it creates a container which stores the application that we running. And then developers are able to build, test, and deploy apps quickly without worrying about system differences. So they can work on that application within that container that is created by Docker. So you can run your backend database and other services together in isolated environments, making development and deployment smoother and more reliable. Cool. So within this tutorial 4, I have a application where users can basically create, read, update, and delete um, tutorials. So it's just demonstrating a REST API. In order to get this Spring Boot application running, we use Docker. So I have firstly this Docker file over here, as well as Docker Compose YML. So here I have this Docker file. So what it does is it builds the app container. So because we need our application to be within a container to work from it from there. And it installs dependencies, compiles code, and runs Spring Boot. So as we can see here, it also makes up the Docker image that we're using, which basically just declares everything we need for the application, the code, the libraries, the settings, and the instructions. And all of that is gonna be placed within our container. That's what this declares. So declares that we're using Maven, shows that we're setting the working directory inside the container that we create using Docker. So this is the directory base coder. Uses copy to copy all the files from our local project into the container. Builds the project using Maven, runs the Spring Boot app when the container starts. So when we run the application with a specific command, then it creates a container and then it runs the application because the application is within that container. Cool. Then we have the Docker Compose YML over here. So this specific file basically is gonna run both our containers together. Then it's gonna start Postgres and our app, wires them up, and then injects the configuration. So in this file, it basically shows the two containers, right? So this container as well as this container. So you can see this Postgres DB container is obviously going to hold our Postgres database, right? And then here app container is going to hold the Spring Boot application. These two containers connect to each other uh, by declaring Postgres DB, which is referring to this container, and then they basically connect together so that we're able to connect the application within this container to the database within this container. Within our env files, we we have the Postgres settings as well as the app settings. So it's declaring the ports that we're running on and the passwords. So here's the name of the database within our container, bestcoder.db. Um, the ports that it runs on, and then this is showing the ports that the app runs on, 6868. So basically, as you can see how the application works, we have our tutorial controller, which is going to handle all requests in order to perform or to perform CRUD functionality. So to retrieve specific tutorials, to create tutorials, to update, and to delete. and we have all our endpoints declared over here, right? So as we can see, then we have our tutorial model, which is the structure of our data. It declares all the fields such as the title, description, and published, initializes it with this constructor when we create the objects, and has getters to get all the data for those fields, and so on. Then the tutorial repository, which basically interacts with our database. So in order to run this application, it's a specific Docker command that we use, right? So the Docker command we use is docker compose up, this one here. So essentially, what this does is it runs the application, but before it runs the application, it creates containers. The containers, specifically being the Postgres DB container, which is holding the SQL database, as well as the app container, which is holding the Spring Boot application with all its files and code and dependencies and all of that. So yeah, as you can see here. Um, so when we run that, after it creates the containers, it runs the application, and the application starts working. So just to show, see, yeah, see. So if I want to check the specific containers that were created, I just run docker ps, and then it shows the containers, right? So we have here the container ID, the image, right, referring to the Spring Boot application. So this container, as we can see here, is basically gonna hold is basically holding the Spring Boot application itself, whereas this container is holding the Postgres database itself, right? So yeah, so that shows that our containers were created properly. Um, and when we go to the Docker desktop, which is on our local machine, we can see the two containers that are created here. So this one, the Postgres container, showing the image. Uh, so yeah, the Postgres container over here, as well as the application container over here, right? So this is the Postgres container holding the database. This is the application container holding the Spring Boot application. These two containers are connected to each other so that we're able to add data to the database and delete data from the database and so on, via our application. So just to show that it's running, I'm gonna go ahead and create, or I'm gonna go fetch all the tutorials within the application using this API endpoint, sending a GET request to it, and we can see all the tutorials over here in our backend. Then I'm gonna go create a specific tutorial. So when I create a tutorial, like anything, uh, post request to this endpoint, and you can see the localhost is 6868. That is declared in our env over here. So that is the local port that we're running on. And when you send that request, you can see that it's running, and um, that specific tutorial is created. Then go ahead and update that specific request. So by adding its ID at the end there, so 103, and we want to change the description for instance. And when you change the description, uh, then you can see that the put request to update this specific tutorial works because the description just changed after I changed it, updated it over there. So we can fetch specific tutorials that are published, for instance. So let's go fetch a tutorial that's published. So in order to do that, we'll declare published here. And when we send that get request, it fetches all tutorials that are published, which is just only the one I just created now. Then we can delete. So we'll delete this specific tutorial over here. So when we delete that tutorial, we declare the ID to locate that tutorial, and now it's deleted. To show that it's deleted, it shows here all the tutorials except the one with ID 103, which is the rugby tutorial. So it doesn't show this one anymore. So that just shows that our backend works because of Docker after we ran it with that specific command. This one here, Docker compose up build. So yeah. Then essentially to show that our Spring Boot application within this container, right, is connected to our database within this container over here. We gonna go check that the database actually works and is actually running. So let's test with SQL queries in our database. So in order to access our database, right, in order to access this database, we need to basically access the container itself, right? So we have to access this container in order to access its database, right? So to do that, there's a specific command that we have to run, which is this command to access that specific container. Now that we access the container, you can see we're in the container. We can now get into the database itself. So in order to access the database, we declare this command over here. PSQL, name of the database, bestcoder. And now we're within the database, as we can see over here. Now that we're in the database, we can go and select all the tutorials from our database to show that the application actually added tutorials in our back end to the database when we were making these get requests. I mean, these are post requests over here. So once that happens, we can see what we get. We get all our data. So all the tutorials with the ID description, if it's published, and the title, and then it shows all the tutorials over here. As we can see as well, to make reference to our API, we see all the tutorials here. So that just shows that it works. So yeah, that's basically how Docker works in order to run our application, to create containers for our application to be stored in, and to connect our database within one container to our Spring Boot application in another container. So yeah.